Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets beat the Milwaukee Bucks and head into the weekend with more questions about which direction this record is going to be headed, plus injury updates and trade market outlooks, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Marbrick. There is no Doug Norrie, but we still thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms and let you know that you can start the season, all seasons, every season with big returns on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And where we get started is where the Brooklyn Nets got started. Maybe all the way back to the offseason with winning too many games. They win another one against the Milwaukee Bucks. We'll get into the game a little bit here. There's some good performances. Noah Clowney continues to stack great games for himself in his young career, the three-point shooting percentage, all of those things. Ben Simmons, Cam Johnson. But also looking ahead here, there's a couple of matchups coming up over the weekend for the Brooklyn Nets that are going to matter for them in terms of the Tankathon odds and where they stand on players like Dorian Finney-Smith, who Jordi Fernandez came out and said, we're trying to bring him back, maybe trying to save him from himself a little bit. How is that playing into the way we think about some of these veterans and injury concerns, not only from a wins and losses for the Brooklyn Nets, but then also from a market standpoint and teams that are going to be interested. But before we get into a little bit of the 111-105 victory for the Brooklyn Nets, we're down the stretch. They took care of business. No Giannis in this one for Milwaukee, but still got the job done. A game they trailed in going down to the last 5-6 minutes of the fourth quarter. I did want to take the high-level view on where we stand over on Tankathon and the odds and some of the very kind of delicate margins we play in here. Because even though we're not going to sit here and say, at least on this podcast, that this is a team, we had this conversation early on, you want the team to win. Some people have said, pivot from the tank, and that was a big part of it with the way Jordi Fernandez is coaching, with the way some of these players look. And after the Dennis Schroeder trade and the big loss to the Cavs, it kind of looked like, okay, now we're getting back on track here. You have Ben Simmons getting a bigger role here now. They're finding ways, as they've done all year, to win basketball games. But when you go over on Tankathon, a couple funny things happen. If you caught our discussion yesterday with Matt George from Locked on Kings, we talked about this trade package and potential with Cam Johnson. But meanwhile, the Sacramento Kings are also now 13-8. So they're not getting in the right direction, finding ways to win, actually losing their fifth consecutive. So Brooklyn dropped a little bit there in the Tankathon. They're now sitting there in eighth, still behind Philadelphia and Portland and Utah and Charlotte and Toronto and Washington and New Orleans. But the funny thing about it is, 12-18, right? So take away this notion of the tank and what this season is supposed to be. If you were sitting here at 12-18 in a typical year, maybe Nets don't have their picks control, things of that nature. You'd say, well, 12-18, that's a team that can give you some fight, and on any given night, even against Milwaukee, maybe with some players out, they can go ahead and get you a win, right? There's no matchup outside of maybe a couple of the elites, as we've seen, that are really going to come in and just blow the doors off of Brooklyn. But when you extrapolate a 12-18 record out over an 82-game season, or even just over the remainder of the season, a 40% win percentage, you're going to end up being a 33-win team, a little bit under technically, right? 32, 33-win team. And at the end of the year, you'd be having a much different conversation than the one that you might have right now. So, and the comparison with the Kings is actually a great one to look at. Not because of this season and what the Kings went and did in adding DeMar DeRozan and what their expectations are, but the idea that at 12-18, at 13-18, being in that mix and saying, yeah, listen, if we went and added a player, how far off would we be, right? You go back and you look at your schedule and you say, well, a win here and a win there, and you're a 14-16 team. You're only a 2 or 3 game winning streak from getting back on the right side of 500 and continue to make a push. The other side of that is, though, if you continue on this path, because you can't go back and cherry pick a couple of games and woulda, shoulda, could have, you look back another 15, 20 games from now, another 30 games from now, another 40 games from now, and you say, what was this season? Now, expectations are obviously a big factor. And ironically, if the Kings and the Nets stayed on the same course right now, by the end of the year, Nets fans will be having a conversation, 31, 32 win season. What the heck went wrong? We were supposed to be near, if not at the top of the draft lottery odds, having control of our own pick back now, having multiple picks in this upcoming deep draft class. How did we not get enough veterans offered? Did we not make the trades at the deadline? Did we not move Cam Johnson? Did we not move Dorian Finney-Smith? Did we not sit down key players? Or did Cam Thomas come back and Noah Clowney took this seismic leap in the second half of the season and the team was flat out under Jordi Fernandez too good? That's the conversation that we'd be having from a Brooklyn Nets perspective. Where did we not make the right decisions to make sure that we were closer to the top than the back end of that first round? For a team like the Kings, they'd be saying, what the heck went wrong here? The talent on paper, right? Expectations. Were we able to go get the player we needed to? But how did this team underperform? And unlike maybe the Brooklyn Nets, they may be asking, as we've heard a little bit of, some serious questions about their head coach and whether or not he's executing, managing, right? Finding ways to get the most out of their roster. When we talk with Matt George, as a little caveat, he did say, boy, we're missing him. We're missing Jordi Fernandez on this staff clearly this season. So there's a big part of all of this that comes down to where is the breaking point? And we already said, can you get to the top, 3-4 picks of the draft class? Well, it's going to be hard. And we can get into that a little bit too, obviously. But at some point, you need to just think about where are we going to be if, right? And all these teams inside of the tank odds right now, above Brooklyn, Philadelphia is the team trying to get out of there, right? They're 7-3 in their last 10. They're giving away their pick, by the way. So they're also encouraged. That one's going to OKC. They're also inspired to want to do as good as possible, or play as well as possible, I should say. They're trying to get out of it, and they probably will. Like in the long term, I think we'll see them slowly turn things around. But Portland, who came off a win as well, but they're 2-8 in their last 10. They're a 10-20 team, 7-win team in Utah, in Charlotte, in Toronto, 5-win teams in Washington. And the Pelicans, we had this discussion the other day, and I was talking about teams behind the Brooklyn Nets in the lottery odds. The Pelicans are going to be a team that's going to jettison off some stuff here. I mean, that couldn't be any more clear, right? They're 5-26. Their win percentage is a disaster. Zion is often hurt. You've got Ingram. You've got McCollum. So expect things to happen there with them. But it's going to be hard to catch those teams. And oddly enough, when you go all the way up the chain, like the Pelicans who have a 161 win percentage, even if you looked at the Brooklyn Nets right now and said, okay, they've got 52 games left, and we're going to go ahead and assume that they only win 16% of their games. They match the worst possible win percentage currently on the board. That's still going to get them to 20 wins. Now, they'll be a 20-62 team, which is a terrible record, but you have to ask the other teams ahead of you to perform above that expectation, right? I mean, it's only 8 more wins for Brooklyn to get that, playing the odds-on worst basketball that anyone is playing in the league right now. But that still requires a team like Utah to go and win 14 games over their remaining, 30, they got 53 games left on their season, right? So you keep playing these percentages, and as you go through it, when Charlotte's on a 23% win percentage of 241 for Utah, you can play with those numbers and say, what if Brooklyn gets worse, right? From their 400 win percentage, it still takes a lot to close those gaps. And the difference between 161 and 241, which is 1 to 5, you play with those percentages, it's the difference between 8 wins to up maybe 11 wins, right? Maybe up to 12. So you're still, if you're the Brooklyn Nets, going to be playing in the waters of being a 20 to 23, 24 win season, probably, depending on how they play things out. If you can get low, you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to be in absolute no man's land, sitting there potentially about as close to the back end of the lottery as you can get. The nice thing here is that there are teams, I mentioned this the other day, that are staying competitive, a lot of 500 clubs near the back end of the lottery. The more teams that want to stay competitive, the more teams that go towards the deadline saying, hey, can we go out and make a trade here? Keeps the market high for Cam Johnson, maybe for Dorian Finney-Smith. We don't know any other players. Daron Sharp's been floated a little bit. Hopefully it keeps more teams engaged. It means they get a couple more wins that they want to and keep us at least as entrenched in that top 8. I think 7, maybe 6 is the ultimate goal that they can possibly at least reach in this moment right now, based on the way teams have played. That's where we're at. So at some point, you have to just accept that the wins or the losses are going to be what they're going to be. And then we drill our attention down on how are some of the young players developing on this roster over the remainder of the season, and where are these veteran trades going to come from? We'll continue that conversation here on the other side, looking at Noah Clowney's performance, Ben Simmons, Cam Johnson. Yeah, they got it done. But where do we stand on Cam Johnson, who fell hard on his shoulder driving to the basket last night, on Dorian Finney-Smith, who was held out for another game here as a precautionary measure? Is the organization trying to hedge itself here as some of those trade calls start to come in? We'll do that next in just one moment. Before we do that, though, tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Oh, you know that you can make your holidays. We're coming out of them, but still going towards New Year's. Even bigger and brighter with Prize Picks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Prize Picks now offers MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. That can be NBA, it could be NFL going, heading towards the end of their season, into the playoffs, obviously. Hockey's in full swing as well. And you can join now because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December. So close it out here. A couple of days left, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. See what they did there? Little picks, little Christmas, little Picksmas. All you have to do right now is download the app today and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's download the app today and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And when you're done with that, go ahead and head over to our friends at Rocket RX, because today's episode is brought to you by Rocket RX. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers an FDA-approved treatment for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than the branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your house in a discreet, plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team. Complete a quick 100% online consultation, and you could get your free prescription today. Visit rx.com today to get started now. It takes only 2 minutes, and right now our listeners can get 40% off their first order when you use promo code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com, promo code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, a couple of things. If you're watching over on YouTube, no shirt and tie. A couple of reasons. One, I'm flying solo. Maybe I want to be a little more casual, but also it's Friday, right? So casual Fridays. Maybe that's what we'll institute going forward here. Back on Monday, looking sharp for all you people that like that little visual appeal. Now, when we go back to this game, 111-105, the Nets get the win over the Milwaukee Bucks. We mentioned here, Milwaukee, no Giannis in this game. Although, you know, when we think about it going forward this season, I mentioned at the top the Cleveland Cavs game and that blowout loss, and saying, well, without Dennis Schroeder, maybe this is what it's going to look like going forward. But the Nets have pivoted back to something that we were curious to see, and that's the Ben Simmons, right, of it all. He's playing 29 minutes now. He goes 4 of 9, so the shot volume was certainly back up where you want it to be, or closer to where you want it to be against the Bucks. And you've got this different combination that ends up playing itself out in terms of contributors. And this really has followed suit with the next man up mentality. There's no overlooking the 23 minutes, 7 of 10, 4 of 6 from deep, 20-point performance from Shake Milton, like we all knew would be the case coming into this year. But you have 4 starters in double digits. I mentioned Ben Simmons only finishes with 8, but he dishes out 9 dimes. You get Keon Johnson. Now, this is he's doing the seesaw. We talked about this the other day as well, Doug and I. We say, it's just been too inconsistent. Comes right back with a great performance. Listen, overall, you're going to look at the 12-point contribution and be okay with that. But that's a pretty big volume. He took the most shots for the Nets lineup on a Thursday night against the Milwaukee Bucks, exactly like we would have assumed coming into this season. 5 of 15, just 2 of 9 from deep, grabs 4 rebounds, a couple of steals mixed in there as well. In terms of the overall, though, the starting lineup carried the day. Outside of Keon Johnson, everybody with a positive plus minus in the other 4, and then even coming in off the bench here, you get positives, which is really interesting. Probably want to go back and look at Jalen Wilson's game on a closer level here, because 32 minutes and 2 of 7 and 0 of 4 from deep and only 4 points. That would be a first sign indicator of a, not concern, but just a bad game from Jalen Wilson, because we need him to contribute on the offensive end. but 4 rebounds, 5 assists, right? So I think as we move forward here, we've talked about some of the younger players. The trades are going to come, and we'll discuss that as well. But as we move forward here, you're going to look inside box scores and see 7 to 10 from the fields from Noah Clowney. We talked about his three-point volume. Well, guess what? It only went higher. 9 three-point attempts, knocked down 6 of them. So there's no complaints here, and gave you 20 points. He was tied for second most, only behind Cam Johnson in the team overall here, starting rotation. He was the second highest point getter as well. It's another big game for Cam Johnson. And this, by the way, is also the game where you have knockdown shots. So when I bring up Keon Johnson and a relatively lackluster performance, yes, that is true. However, when you go into the fourth quarter, and I want to make sure that we lay this out the right way, as you get down underneath that 5-minute mark, the Nets are trailing 92-97, and you start to walk through it, right? You end up with it being Cam Johnson, they have listed there as Cameron. Cam Johnson goes to the line a couple of times. You get in spite of a bad, quote-unquote, scoring performance from Jalen Wilson, yes, but he gets the putback off the miss, rebound, and put back him. So 2 of his 4 points come at a critical moment late in the fourth quarter to help out. It's also going to be when you get Keon Johnson making a three-pointer that gives the Nets the lead 99-97. So even in a box score where you look at it, and I think one thing we need to adjust when it comes to younger players or players that haven't had as much experience, we would say this about superstars because their track record is always going to be better more often than not. But we should also say it about some of these young guys, right? Keon Johnson had a bad overall game, but Keon Johnson also knocked down a triple with 3:40 to go to give the Nets the lead. While Milwaukee came back and tied it up, the Nets never gave the lead back and followed it up with a Noah Clowney, right? You end up with a Noah Clowney bucket there. He pushes it to 102.99, and you continue to hedge your way away. There's some free throws for Nicholas Claxton. There's another one coming in from Cam. Cam ends up knocking down the final triple that I think really seals it, even though it's 47 seconds, and then there's a whole bunch of possessions and back and forth and extending the game. But ultimately, whether you look at the box score and see the flashy stats, which are how Noah Clowney's been performing, and continue to watch that, but you also have to give the tip of the cap to Keon Johnson, right? Bad box score doesn't mean you didn't make a critical play. Bad box score for Jalen Wilson doesn't mean you didn't make a critical play. And those are 3 young players that presumably we're going to see a lot more of. Now, Cam Johnson, who we may see less of far sooner than we would anticipate. Well, we hope it is, right? But 35 minutes, ends up leading the team in minutes, 8 of 13, 4 of 6 from deep, 9 of 9 at the line, right? He leads the way, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, ends up being a +8 overall and gives you 29-point performance. I will say this, while we continue to wait for the return of Cam Thomas to the lineup here, and that's going to take some time. This is around the marker when it's returned from injury territory for him. In the meantime, it now does become, first it was Dennis Schroeder and the way that he can run the offense and facilitate it. You took him away. We've seen some bad games, and then we've also seen some decent ones. But because Ben Simmons is not the attack at the basket guy or the pure scorer with consistency, same thing we talk about other guys, with consistency, providing that for the team, you know that you're going to have disjointed possessions. You know you're going to have ugly stretches, and we think, you're going to lose more games than not. The next phase is now, you get Cam Johnson off this roster, and what happens from there? Even if Cam Thomas returns, I think I'm not going to call it a concern, but just one of the realities is, how is it going to look when you've taken away Schroeder and then you take away Cam Johnson and then Thomas comes back in? You're still going to have Ben Simmons, however, to whatever level he's going to be able to perform at and the impact he has on a night-over-night basis. But we've seen versions of, and it's not his fault, but we've seen versions where Cam Thomas as the only offensive weapon, it can get pretty ugly pretty fast. Now, I think it'll be different under Jordi Fernandez because I think the process and the way in which you want to run the offense and the expectations have been set and continue to get raised for him and everyone. But I do worry about what this is going to look like as you continue to strip away some of these pieces. And every time the Brooklyn Nets win a game, I do think, while Jordi Fernandez and the players are excited on a locker room level and an on-court level, Sean Marks and ownership are looking at it and saying, okay, we do have to continue to push and have these trade conversations and figure out what we're going to do with these guys. Now, Jordi Fernandez also talked about Dorian Finney-Smith, held him out for one more game. They're going to see what it looks like here Friday night. You got the Spurs. How much of this do we think is a little bit of a game for the Brooklyn Nets and the medical staff and trying to make sure that, one, you keep these guys healthy, but also try to keep them off the court, even if it doesn't matter, because for every time you sit one player down, another player pops up, another player takes up that mantle. And in any other year, if the Nets didn't have this agenda of tanking, we'd be talking about just celebrating the win over the Bucks and being excited purely about all these performances and not worrying about the implication that it has going forward. Coming back on the other side, let's talk about trades. Let's talk about value, and let's talk about Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson. We'll do that here in just one moment. But first, got to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Oh, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, as the season's winding down and the playoffs get going, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you placed your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official betting partner of the NFL. All right, so as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, we remind you we're going to have the Nets are coming up here on Friday night, taking on the San Antonio Spurs, which we should take a look at here just in terms of where this team is right now. The Nets, by the way, just to round this out, because they got that win on the road here, 7-10 away. So when you sit here and you look inside of it, they are a 5-18 at home, 5-8 team at home. It's one of those things that originally, when I thought about this season, if you're going to balance out where wins and losses come, win the games at home. Like, whatever your record is going to be at the end of the year, have the home record be as strong as it can be. Have the away record be as disgusting and deplorable and, be the worst humanly possible team away from Barclays. But when you are at Barclays Center and the fans show up to support the team, win those games. If you're going to get wins, they might as well be in front of your home crowd, so that no matter what the end result of this year becomes, that you are talking about giving the fans at least something to be excited about when they show up to the arena. They buy the tickets, they pay the money, right? We all know it's not easy to get out. It's not easy to fork over the money. So might as well get a good product in those moments when you choose to go to those games. That being the case, I mentioned there that, first of all, winning that game last night is obviously, as you do the balances of where these losses could come from, it's unfortunate that winning that Milwaukee game, now you're going to go play San Antonio. Now, the difference here is, like, the Milwaukee, they're a good team. There's no Giannis. They're expecting to make the playoffs, deep run, all that good stuff. The difference now with San Antonio, and I've been saying this for the last few weeks here, when we talk about trades, I think that San Antonio should be discussed because they're a 500 team, because they already have Wemby on their roster, right? So, yes, can they look at the next year's draft class and say, well, if we end up being a lottery team, we obviously put ourselves in a position potentially to get another premier talent to pair with Wemby. And I'm sure that's part of the equation. But it's really hard to me, if you're sitting there and looking at the NBA and where the standings are out in the Western Conference, are the Spurs going to make some playoff noise? No, but they're just outside of, right? They're right behind Golden State right now. Golden State's 15-14. Minnesota also 15-14. Phoenix also 15-14, right? So, I mean, they are a win away from being the 8th seed in the Western Conference. Now, once you get to that point, right, starting with the Clippers at 17-13, and I think we're going to see here, as things start to move forward, there will be some separation, but you start to move up the scale here. The reality is Oklahoma City, right? Houston Rockets, Memphis Grizzlies. We're going to talk about them in a second when it comes to Dorian Finney-Smith. Even the Dallas Mavericks, right? Like, these top 3 or 4 seeds, there is a separation here. And the Denver Nuggets, even though they're removed from winning the championship by a season, I still would keep an eye on what they plan on doing as they approach the deadline. So is there an expectation that the San Antonio Spurs are going to vault themselves into real conversations in the West? Probably not. Maybe they want to come calling about a Dorian Finney-Smith, about a Cam Johnson. The bottom line being is that they are a team that has remained competitive, right? They're plus minus. They are a minus 1.1 point differential. There are 2 other teams in the West, in LA in the 6th seed, who's a minus 2.5, and the Phoenix Suns, who are a minus 1.3. The difference would be pedigree, and you feel like you have the bigger superstars, even with Wemby, more experienced superstars. It's all great. But the Spurs are in that conversation. And all it means is that this is not going to be a walkover loss as you would expect. And coming off of games like this against Milwaukee, you actually have to go the other way with it. You have to assume it's probably more likely the Nets actually win that game. And then they'll have Orlando on the road, 3-game trip here at Toronto, and then at Milwaukee again. So these next 4 games, if you take what we've seen over the course of this season to this point, San Antonio is going to be a winnable game. Toronto is definitely going to be a winnable game. It's impossible to say that the Milwaukee game isn't winnable, but if Giannis is back, that's a very different complexion, obviously. And then Orlando. The Nets might go 2-2 over these next 4 games and really heading into this weekend because they're going to play San Antonio on Friday night and then come back on Sunday against Orlando afternoon tilt. They could turn around and still be now. They're 30 games in at this moment. Okay, put another 4 games on the belt and play 500 ball. There's not really, it's going to be interesting to see like what stretch becomes ultra dangerous. The other part of this too is pointed out over on social. Hey, if you're going to win a game, win it against Milwaukee because obviously we own their pick. By the end of it, I don't think it's going to matter that much for Milwaukee and where that pick lands, whether it's going to be, 24th or 22nd. It's 19 right now. They also have the 25th and 27th currently projected at the moment. But at the end of the day, when you look over the schedule, start to circle the ones against the bad teams, right? It's why when you lose to Utah, that feels good. Game prior, when you beat Toronto, that felt bad. Because if you're going to close the gap on these teams, those are the ones that you want to lose. So San Antonio, I mean, listen, they are behind you there. They could become a challenge. You prefer to lose that game. Orlando, go win that game. Orlando wants to stay competitive. They're doing their thing. Toronto, lose that game. You want to turn around and beat Milwaukee and improve that position, that pick? Go ahead, right? So the better teams, it's okay. That's probably the best place to get vibes for the fan base, beating some of those teams that are unexpected and typically beating them because they are obviously, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you perform. You're always going to let your guard down against a team that is believed to be one of the worst in the league, that is believed to want to get a higher draft pick and not win games. So they keep surprising you. Great. Surprise those teams. But lose to every possible team that is in front of you in these tank odds. And over this next month, and I'm including the back end of December here, but they're going to have San Antonio. You can say, hey, let's keep ahead of them, lose that game. They're going to have Toronto. They're going to have Detroit, who wants to win, by the way, and is just struggling to do so. You're also going to have Utah, and you're going to have Portland. So by the middle of January, you're going to have 5 more games that are either against the teams ahead of you or the ones that are right behind you. So those are the ones that you want to lose as much as possible. And then you can start to have the conversation about how things shift here. I didn't get into, we're going to have over the weekend, Sunday. I may even come in live after that one because of 3:30 tip-off for the Brooklyn Nets. Maybe we'll do our first post-game live of the season. Going to be another solo vehicle for Monday. So stay tuned for that. I'll shout it out over on X. But when you look at this, there's going to be some push and pull here about trade value and when you want to pull that trigger. So we'll see how this weekend plays out. Could see Dorian Finney-Smith tonight, Friday, against the Spurs. Maybe not. They're being overly cautious with him. It's not just because they don't want him to get hurt. It's also because Dorian Finney-Smith has been a guy that's had some minor, small injuries here across the course of this season. Nets are 30 games into the year, and right now, you have Cam Thomas, who's been out. He only played 17. Cam Johnson has only missed 1 game to this point. Dorian Finney-Smith has only played in 19 games and may miss Friday night, right? So we talk so much coming into this year about trade value and veterans and Cam Johnson and that risk of him getting hurt. And you saw the way he lands coming down hard after he goes to the basket against Lopez. Former Brooklyn Net, helped him up, checked on him. But when you see those moments, you start to just be wary of making sure, because if he goes down with any kind of significant injury, it is going to trade the trade market looks like. The fact that Dorian Finney-Smith is being held out, I think, is the preventative measure to make sure they're going to get maximum value for him. But he's also 31 years old. So it factors into all of this that you have veteran players that if you are other teams that are calling, yeah, you're at least going to check in on the idea that he has missed a third of the games, more than a third of the games this season at this point, even though he's been productive, even though he's knocking down a high 3-point percentage. I think that's just the Nets safeguarding against injury risk. Memphis Grizzlies are really building up. I think we talked about them last week as a key target or landing place potentially for Dorian Finney-Smith. Had that interesting conversation with Matt George from Locked On Kings about alternatives as well. So we come in on Sunday, recap the weekend for Monday's episode, probably, again, reset the trade market, throw out a few teams that we believe could or should be calling. And the list is getting deeper and deeper when it comes to Cam Johnson. What do we want to get back for him? Is it more important that we get back a key developing young player, that extra pick in the draft, or just that we get him off this team as soon as possible, as terrible as that is to say? Because if not for Cam Johnson last night, they lose that game. There's other contributors inside of it, but you need someone who can put up that type of consistent scoring night in and night out. And the Nets do not have many of those players on their roster. We'll do all those things. We'll do all of those things. Next up is San Antonio on Friday night. They'll play over the weekend as well. And we'll see how the Nets come out with another couple games under their belt and where they stand in the tank odds and all the trade rumors that swirl. So you get over to YouTube at Locked On Nets. You get us on X at Doug Norrie and at Adam Armbrecht, and go ahead and subscribe. That's what Doug always loves. He loves to see subscribers. Get over them, the podcast feeds over on YouTube. Spread the word. Tell your friends. Tell your family. And as always, when there is no Doug Norrie, there is no quote. Short of saying that I miss my friend, and I can't wait until he's back. I can't wait until he's back so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball.